The transport ship Orant's Mercy held 11 cadets in cryo-harness, and not one of them was smiling except the 2 humans, who were arm wrestling in 0G, while everyone else recited the Concordat survival catechism under their breath. Vask Orinai, senior cadet of House Threll, watched them with the particular exhaustion of someone who had memorized the death toll of Karn's Hollow, and still had to share a drop pod with people who thought it was funny. 11 cycles, Vask said, not for the first time. 11 cycles, and the Ashvale Reaper has killed a cadet, or crippled one, in every single one. This is not a joke. Didn't say it was, said Dane Torble, pinning his opponent's arm to the deck with a grin that belonged nowhere near a war zone. Said it was going to be a good time. Mirei Kagawa Ose Miri, to the 6 people alive who dared use it, flexed her fingers and studied the tactical display without much interest. Karn's Hollow rotated below them, a bruised green and rust marble wrapped in storm bands the color of an old wound. The Concordat had rated it class lethal for 11 consecutive commissioning cycles, and every species that had ever sent officers through the trial had lost someone doing it. Big cat, right? Miri asked. Ashvale Reaper. Territorial apex predator. Ambush hunter. Keys off movement and scent. Ashvale Reaper. Countom paid. Archvale Reaper. It is not a cat, Vask said, in the tone of someone who had said this exact sentence to exactly this kind of person before. It masses 4 times what your largest recorded terrestrial predator does. It has killed armored Threll officers in full combat rig. It has killed Kostin, and the Kostin have exoskeletal plating rated against small arms fire. You will not survive this by finding it charming. Didn't say charming, Dane said. Said it sounded like a design problem. The drop klaxon cut off further argument, which was, in retrospect, the last quiet the squad would get for 3 days. The pods didn't land where they were supposed to. Karn's Hollow's magnetosphere did something to re-entry trajectories that the Concordat's finest engineers had never fully solved. And the storm bands scattered the 11 cadets across nearly 40 kilometers of broken highland forest, all comms jammed to static, all of them alone in the dark, with a suit chrono counting down 72 hours, and a predator rated at the top of a scale that didn't have a category above it. Miri found Dane first, half a day in, by the simple expedient of following the noise, because Dane, upon landing, had immediately started building a lean-to shelter and singing while he did it. An old work song with no words the local wildlife would recognize as language, and every reason to recognize as not prey behavior. Please leave. You're supposed to be quiet, Miri said, dropping into the clearing. I'm supposed to not get eaten, Dane said. Turns out those aren't the same rule. Big predators like this world's got territorial ambush types. They profile things that go quiet and slow as afraid. And afraid means hurt, and hurt means lunch. You want to look boring. Boring's safe. Boring doesn't get chased. It was, Miri had to admit, not the worst logic she'd heard from him. They found 3 more cadets by dusk, a Kostin named Relvoth, with a cracked carapace plate and a permanently offended expression, a soft-spoken Ithuan communications specialist named Sile, who hadn't stopped shaking since landing, and finally Vask himself, who arrived filthy, furious, and visibly relieved to see other living faces, though he'd have died before admitting it. Command's contingency doctrine, Vask said, unrolling a field display with hands that weren't quite steady, is regroup, fortify, wait out the trial window, in a defensible position. We are 8 kilometers from the nearest ridge with adequate sightlines. We move at first light. Or, Dane said, crouched over something in the undergrowth. We could look at this first. It was a kill site. Old weeks old. The alien bones bleached and scattered. The ground scored with claw marks longer than a human forearm, gouged into exposed bedrock like the Reaper had been making a point. A shredded tent. A survival kit that had never been opened. Concordat issue. Sale made a small, awful sound and looked away. Relvoth's mandibles clicked in something that wasn't quite a flinch. Vask stared at the wreckage like it was a mirror of his own future. This is one of last cycle's cadets. Yeah, Dane said, not unkindly, already crouched and measuring the claw-gouged distance with his fingers, turning his head to sight the angle of the strike against the tree line. And look, it came from there, not the open ground, the ridgeline shadow. Struck once, didn't chase far, dragged the body maybe 6 meters before it stopped. He glanced up. That's not a monster hunting on instinct. That's an animal that knows exactly how much energy a kill costs and doesn't waste a step more than it has to. Your point, Vask said. Being what, exactly? That we should feel reassured? My point, Dane said, standing and dusting off his knees, is that something this efficient has patterns, and patterns can be worked. Miri was already crouched by the ruined tent, turning over the shredded fabric, and there was a look on her face that Vask had, over the last day and a half, come to associate with genuine trouble. 11 cycles, she said slowly. Every squad that's come through here has done the exact same thing. Fortify high ground. Wait it out, react when it comes. That is the doctrine, Vask said, because it is the doctrine that keeps the most people alive. It's the doctrine that gets someone killed every single year, Miri said, because it hands the initiative to the one thing on this planet that's better at waiting than we are. She looked up at him, and there was nothing mocking in it, now just a kind of bright, terrible focus that Vask would later come to recognize as the specific expression humans wore right before they did something insane and, infuriatingly, effective. What if we stopped waiting for it to come to us? What are you suggesting? Dane grinned, and it was the grin of a man who had already started doing math in his head. I'm suggesting, he said, that 11 cycles of prey animals have been running from this thing. Maybe it's time somebody organized a hunt. Vask opened his mouth to say something about regulations, about the sanctity of the trial, about the fact that 4 of the 5 people in this clearing did not have the muscle density, or claws, or armor plating to survive direct engagement with an apex predator 4 times their mass. And that was the exact moment the light changed. The sun was dropping fast behind the ridgeline, staining the storm bands overhead a deep arterial red, and the forest around them had gone utterly, wrongly silent. No wind hiss, no chittering undergrowth, nothing but 5 people breathing too loud in a clearing that suddenly felt very small. Relvoth's head snapped toward the tree line. Movement. It came out of the shadow the way Dane had described, not fast, not frantic, a slow, deliberate unfolding of a shape too large for the space it stood in, easily 3 meters at the shoulder, matted rust-colored hide, scarred with the marks of old fights. Eyes the pale, patient yellow of something that had never once had to hurry. It didn't roar. It didn't charge. It simply looked at them, and then it looked, very specifically, at the 2 humans, and something in its posture shifted, a recognition, a cataloging, like it had seen this configuration of prey species before and knew precisely how the last 10 fights had gone. It knows the formation, Sael whispered, horrified. It's seen Concordat squads before. It knows how we fight. The Reaper's muscles bunched. The retreat path behind them, the ridge, the high ground, the doctrine was already gone, cut off by broken terrain and failing light. Nobody move. Vask breathed. Doctrine dying in his throat, even as he said it. Because for the first time in 11 cycles, something in that yellow gaze suggested the doctrine had already been read, studied, and found wanting. And then it moved. Doctrine said, hold formation, present a unified front, let the armored cadets anchor the line. Doctrine did not survive contact. The Reaper came in low and fast for something its size, and it didn't go for the obvious targets it went for. Relvoth, cracked carapace and all. The one member of the squad whose armor had already failed once. Vask screamed the formation call a half-second too late, and Relvoth went down hard under a foreleg the size of a support strut, and for one suspended, silent moment, Vask understood, completely, that 11 cycles of cadets had died because the doctrine was built to manage a predictable threat, and the Reaper had simply stopped being predictable. What happened next didn't look like a rescue. It looked like chaos. Dane didn't draw a weapon. He grabbed the still-lit emergency flare from his webbing, the one Concordat doctrine explicitly classified as a signaling device and not a combat tool, and he threw it not at the Reaper, but past it, into the dry brush at its flank, and the resulting flash crackle of light and noise was enough to make 4 tons of apex predator flinch sideways off its kill. It was enough. Barely. Miri was already moving, hauling Relvoth's dead weight backward across broken ground, with strength that had no business belonging to someone her size, and the Reaper's claws caught her across the shoulder as it recovered not the kill strike it had planned, but a glancing, brutal graze that opened her suit and her skin both and dropped her to one knee with a sound that made Vask's blood go cold. But Relvoth was clear. And the Reaper, robbed of its kill and startled by fire and noise it hadn't accounted for, retreated into the dark to reassess. For the first time in 11 cycles, it had lost a kill it had already secured. They made camp in a shallow cave system half a kilometer on. Relvoth stabilized, Miri's shoulder field dressed, and her jaw set against the pane in a way that Vask found he could not stop looking at. She had thrown herself into the strike radius of an animal that had already killed cadets from every species in the Concordat, to save someone whose own species regarded humans as unproven and soft, and she had not hesitated for even a fraction of a second. "Why?" Vask said finally. "Did you do that?" Miri looked at him like it was a strange question. "Because he was going to die if I didn't. That is not sufficient reasoning for a Threll officer." "I'm not a Threll officer," Miri said, and there was no smugness in it, just simple fact. "Look, your doctrine's not wrong that this thing is dangerous. It's wrong that the only options are run or die well. There's a third option. Nobody's tried it because nobody's had the right kind of stupid. And humans," Vask said slowly, "have the right kind of stupid. One. Humans," Dane said, crouched over a hasty sketch scratched into the cave floor with a knife point, "have the right kind of creative. It's not the same thing, but it gets confused for it a lot." The sketch was a map. Kill site, cave, ridgeline, the dry brush field they'd used to spook the Reaper the first time and radiating from it, a plan that made Vask's carapace crawl with something between horror and reluctant, dawning respect. "You want to lure it," he said. "I want to choose the fight," Miri corrected. "It's ambushed every squad that's come through here because every squad reacted on its terms, in its territory, on its schedule. We change all three. We pick the ground, we pick the bait, we pick the moment." "With what bait?" Sale said, voice thin. "Noise, motion, heat signature, the exact profile of a wounded straggler," Dane said. "Same profile? It's hit successfully 11 cycles running. Except this time, the straggler is standing in a kill box we've built, with a fire break at its back so it can't retreat the way it wants to, and everyone else positioned to control where it goes instead of what it does. That is not a survival trial anymore," Vask said. "That is a hunt." "Yeah," Miri said. And for the first time since the drop, she smiled, not mockingly, not lightly, but with the focused, terrible warmth of someone who had decided, completely and permanently, that they were done being afraid. "That's the idea. It took the rest of the night to build. Working by suit light and moonless dark. A fire break scraped into the dry brush with entrenching tools and sheer stubbornness. A false trail of scattered supplies leading into a natural stone funnel between two ridgelines. A rigged signal flare wired to Sale's field kit to serve as bait noise from a safe distance. And Dane's contribution, delivered with the pride of a man unveiling his masterpiece. A pit trap disguised under branches and displaced soil, positioned exactly where a predator, driven by fire on one side and rock on the other, would have nowhere else to plant its weight. "You built a pit trap," Vask said, staring at it in the gray pre-dawn light. "For a 4-ton apex predator. With entrenching tools. Humans have been doing this since before we had metal," Dane said. "It's not about strength. It's about making the smart animal do something dumber than it thinks it's doing. It worked exactly as well and exactly as badly as such plans always do." The Reaper came at first light, drawn by the flare noise and the scent of blood still on Miri's dressings, and for a moment, one horrible, suspended moment, it seemed to sense the trap for what it was. Pulling up short at the funnel's mouth, yellow eyes narrowing on a killing ground that smelled subtly wrong. "It's not taking the bait," Sale said, voice cracking. "Then we make the bait more convincing," Miri said. And before Vask could stop her, before anyone could stop her, she stepped out from cover into open, exposed ground, injured shoulder and all, directly in the Reaper's line of sight. Not fleeing, not fighting, just standing there, presenting herself as exactly the kind of easy, wounded target 11 cycles of prey had never dared to offer voluntarily. The Reaper's hesitation broke. It charged. It hit the firebreak's edge just as Relvoth, still bleeding but upright out of sheer bloody-minded refusal to be carried again, ignited the dry brush behind it, cutting off the retreat. It swerved from the flame exactly into the funnel exactly as designed, and for 3 seconds that felt like 3 years, 4 tons of apex predator thundered directly toward the one human standing in its path, with nothing between them but open ground and a plan built in one desperate night. Miri didn't run until the last possible instant, and when she did, she went sideways, not backward, cutting hard across the Reaper's charge line the way Dane had drilled into her from the sketch on the cave floor, and the Reaper's own momentum, its own speed, its own certainty that this fight was already won, carried it 2 more strides forward into ground that had been carefully, deliberately hollowed out beneath a thin skin of branches and soil. It went down hard, one leg buried to the shoulder, off balance and roaring for the first time since they'd met it. Not a hunting sound now, but something closer to fury, and underneath the fury, something Vask had never expected to hear from an apex predator. Uncertainty. Nobody moved to kill it. That had never been the plan. Now, Dane shouted, and Sale triggered the second flare, not thrown this time, but set at a distance, filling the funnel with light and smoke and noise on every side but one. The one clear path leading away from all of them, back toward the deep highland forest, back toward territory it actually knew. Trapped, furious, and for the first time in 11 cycles genuinely outmaneuvered, the Ashvale Reaper made the only choice a predator that had just been humiliated by prey a quarter its size could make. It tore free of the pit, and it ran not toward them, but away, vanishing into the smoke-hazed tree line, and not looking back. Nobody breathed for a long moment. Then, Relvoth, of all people, started laughing, a strange, clicking Kostin sound none of them had heard before, but unmistakable in what it meant. "We're alive," Sale said, like she couldn't quite believe the sentence. "We're all alive." The extraction shuttle found them 9 hours later, at the edge of the burned firebreak, 5 cadets standing instead of scattered corpses, for the first time in 11 cycles of the Karn's Hollow trial. Command's debrief officer, a Threll elder with a service record longer than Vask's entire life, reviewed the suit footage in silence for a long time before finally speaking. "You did not defeat the Reaper," she said. "It wasn't quite an accusation." "No," Miri agreed. "We didn't have to. We just had to stop letting it write the rules." The elder looked at the footage again, 5 species surviving together on the deadliest ground the Concordat had ever certified. A doctrine 11 cycles old, unmade in a single night by 2 cadets from a species still officially classified as unproven, and something crossed her weathered features that looked, very carefully, like it was trying not to be fear. "The Concordat will need to revise the trial parameters," she said finally. "Good," Dane said cheerfully, already sketching something new on the back of his hand, the specifics of which would keep 3 separate tactical committees awake for weeks. "Next time, let's make it interesting." Vask, standing in the wreckage of everything he'd been trained to believe about how survival was supposed to work, found himself doing something he hadn't expected, smiling, because Command had sent humanity here expecting them to be the first casualties of the 12th cycle. Instead, they'd organized a hunt on the deadliest predator in Concordat space, and left Command wondering, with real and growing unease, exactly what humans might do on a day when they weren't just trying to survive, but actually trying to win.